Hello, and good morning. Welcome to a pre-taped episode of Screen Junkies Universe. I am Danielle Radford, and I've got with me Ed, Riley, Dan. I didn't say your name this time. I'm trying to avoid your last name so I don't make it sound like mush. A couple of quick things. Yes, like I said, this is a pre-tape. Also, just so you know, if you start hearing like banging and clanging, remember when a few months ago they were destroying everything around us in this office? Well, they've started again. It is the sequel, and so we're all dealing with it.
And this time it's personal.
So, if
the shark has followed us on vacation to remodel our office.
It's getting closer and closer.
So if you do start hearing a lot of like background noise and things like that happening, there is construction happening all around us. And so for this pre-tape this morning, we are going to talk about some great years in movies. We're going to talk about a few that were widely considered some of the best. And then the panel, we're going to go through some of our favorites that weren't already listed. So this is going to be really, really fun. And this is just kind of casual. This isn't like a movie fight. So if you guys have any years or any movies that we don't mention, we want to hear from you. So go ahead and drop those in the comments down below, kindly. So we're going to start with 1960. That's a good year. That's a year that has 4 starters: Psycho, Spartacus, which is the top grossing film, Magnificent Seven, the original.
I'm the top grossing film. Oh, sorry.
Ocean's 11, the original, obviously, GI Blues, and The Apartment. Yeah, so what are some of your favorite films from that year? I love The Apartment.
I love The Apartment. Billy Wilder, Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine, Fred McMurray playing a heel, which is against type for him because he was, you know, my 3 sons. I almost said my 2 dads. Different show.
No car bed in my 3 sons.
Even though he had sort of played, you know, Double Indemnity, had started out kind of film noirish, but
that's where I know him from originally. So, when I discovered him as a person, not like I'm way back. I knew him back before I was born, but like
just such a great romance, and Jack Lemmon playing a schlub, and I just love that movie so much.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
It's easy, but I gotta go with Psycho. Like it was such a game changer for Hitchcock. It was like it went from being his like collection of like I took a Hitchcock class in college, and this was the movie that like broke his formula and like changed things around for him a lot, and was like also the movie that was starting to gear towards the audience that knew him more from like his TV series, which was a lot darker than even his movies had been, and kind of had that like twist vibe to it and that almost like Twilight Zone element to it, and this kind of felt like that. But it's a really interesting movie. It's also one of the first examples of a movie, or best examples of a movie where like the word of mouth was so important to it, and the way that he, you know, as depicted in the movie about it, where like the like rules for how theaters had to screen it and how the audience had to behave. And so it's like the really good example of like a movie being hyped by its marketing versus just the movie itself. And so there's a lot going on with it. So.
Yeah, that was kind of the first like Thanos demand your silence.
Yeah, it was very much so.
Yeah.
Have you seen the trailer for it?
I have, where he just comes out and talks, like lectures the audience.
You're so right about the fact that it was like leaning into his personality as a filmmaker, because it's just him walking around the sets and being like, this dreadful thing happened in here. Oh, I can't even talk about it. You know, it's so very Hitchcockian and that cult of personality that he had cultivated for himself.
And it's a movie that like depends so much on music. Like there's like all the string instruments like just change everything. And there's that great. I can't remember the name of the composer off the top of my head, but
Bernard Herrmann. One of the
and at one point David S. Selznick was like freaking out about it, and Hitchcock was like, "Don't worry, Bernard Herrmann will save everything." Like, it's the greatest thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I wasn't really a big fan of the original Ocean's 11. I think I'd seen it too late, but I really do think that the Magnificent Seven is a very respectful American adaptation of something.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because like a lot of times we'll just take the story and just be like, this needs more cowboys in it. And in this case, it did. In this case, it actually worked.
It works because cowboys are also like the American like fantasy. Like they're like that's like our version of like knights and soldiers, which is what samurai was. So it's like a really like it translates so well.
And coming into an unknown or rather lawless area and having to deal with all of these different factors, and you have to, get your posse. They were always getting posses for some reason or another, and this is like a story of a pretty good posse. That's doing good.
It's a good posse doing good things.
And I had not seen Spartacus actually until this year.
Really?
A lot of people. First of all, I always forget, and a lot of people forget Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
Yep.
Working within the studio system, but also Dalton Trumbo famously wrote it while he was blacklisted at the tail end of being blacklisted. But the other thing that I didn't realize until I watched it, and even today, realizing this came out in 1960, is how subversive that movie is.
Yes.
Just as far as like not even simmering under the surface, like sitting right on the surface, the undertones between the male characters in that movie and how they relate to each other, and dealing with the kind of fluid way that sexuality was actually treated in that setting at that time, but that you couldn't come out and do in a movie at that time. Really just well done. And it's one of those 3-hour movies that does not feel like it's 3 hours long.
It was like the beginning of that era of the 60s where studio films were like known for being those kind of like directors' films and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So what do you think of some of the movies of the 60s? Which ones do you think are the most important? I love The Apartment. I do have to agree. I think that Psycho might be one of the most important for me.
I mean, as far as
I feel like that's hard because genre and
but I mean, it was doing things so that you just didn't do. It broke a lot of rules that were sort of unspoken rules about main characters and what you do with them and likability that a lot of other films would go on to imitate and follow.
As far as importance, I mean, I don't want to be that guy, but To Kill a Mockingbird is really important. For the 1962 movie to be like, okay, well, we're gonna take on like a lot of subjects. You know what I mean? I think it's a really good movie.
Of course it is. Yeah.
Gregory Peck has a really great performance. I think it says something important.
So what do you think the year 1960 will be remembered for, as far as like tone? Or I think that was a really good point that you brought up about how it's really about a director's vision for a lot of these.
The studio system, I think, in that particular era was like really designed towards like storytelling and visual storytelling and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, it's weird because years are recontextualized as we live throughout our lifetime. So 1960 today is a lot different than 1960 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so as you get further along, you find movies that get lost in the shuffle. Some movies that were considered essential maybe move down a little bit. I think Ocean's 11 is one of those movies that, particularly pre the remake, it was seen by a lot of people, and I'm sure that there's some people that are fans of it as a classic. And I think in revisiting it when it was remade in the early 2000s, a lot of people said, oh, you know what, maybe this isn't as good as I remembered it being.
Well, I think it's one of those movies where it's less about the quality of the movie and more just the level of who is in it. And it's like, that was like a murderer's row of the Rat Pack, basically. And it wasn't even meant really, like, it's not a great movie. It's a movie they made so they can hang out and party in Vegas. And there are movies that we love nowadays that are like that. There are
like
tons of
the remakes of Ocean's 11.
Especially the second one. That was like very much like Clooney has a villa and we're going to film in Europe. Like that was what that movie was. But that's why I think the remake was such a good one to make a remake of, because it took what was a great premise for a movie, but necessarily not super well executed because that wasn't the intent behind it. And they're like, what if we actually made like a serious heist film that's fun, but takes itself a little more seriously as a movie? And like that's what they did, and that's why it worked really well. I think good remakes would be wise to find movies that had solid premises that were popular, but aren't always like maybe like the most like well-constructed films, and make those into remakes that like maybe do actually have more like meat to them.
And when Inherit the Wind, I saw in like school, because it was about, the guy who was trying to teach like more or less sort of evolution when it was kind of sort of illegal to do so.
It's based on the monkey trial. It's like a fictionalized monkey trial.
Yeah, and it's just like, I really like that movie because it's like one of those movies about trials is about something. It's not just the sordid nature of crime. It's about like
the sordid nature of crime.
It's us trying to like graduate as human beings. You know what I mean? Graduate to another level of understanding as human beings, and how many people will regress that progress.
Right?
Regress that progress.
I see what you did. We were there. I got it. I'm right there. Yeah. All right, so moving on to our next big year, we're going to look into 1975. That has got Jaws, which was top grossing, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which got Best Picture, Dog Day Afternoon, Barry Lyndon. Big year for movies. Come on, give it to me.
Jaws. I can't not. It's
fantastic.
Dan gave you the. What are we talking about here?
What's left to be said about it? It's a classic. It redefined how summer movies work. It is, one of the most influential movies on many levels of all time. I think it will always be that.
Yeah, it holds up so well even decades later.
It was the number one reason when my mom came to visit this year that she wanted to go on the Universal tour, because you get to go and you get to see like the Jaws area.
Yeah,
she completely lost it, and
not Amityville.
Not Amityville.
As a kid, that would drive me crazy that they're both Amityville and Amity.
Yeah, they're so close. My favorite tweets to get are, because I talk about Jaws incessantly on all of our shows, is when people they'll tweet me and they'll say like, "Hey, I'd never seen Jaws and I just watched it and oh my god, I loved it so much." It's like, I love that. I love when people find a movie like that maybe has been hand waved off, is because it's at this point it's 40. Hang on, let's see, it's 1975. It's 44 years old. Jaws, 45 years old next year. I think. I don't know. I don't do math. That's right. And for it to still be effective, I think is truly standing the test of time.
Well, yeah, it's also pretty. It's made in a pretty modern way. If you really look at how it's staged in a modern way. I've seen movies from 1975, and they're not staged like that. They're a little bit, but the camera on the thing just sort of twisted a little bit.
Yeah.
He's doing all types of stuff with camera placement and like putting cameras in inside things. And to put a barrier between us and the subject, to like, look who's on the outer rails. Look how dangerous it is to be on the outer rails when a shark can jump up and get you. All these little things to show you how dangerous everything is.
I mean, I would counter with more so than even that it was shot in a modern way, is it was shot in a timeless way.
Yeah.
And the great films are. The great films are shot, whether they're made there are movies that are shot in the 1920s that were shot timelessly, that still hold up. Citizen Kane is a movie that was shot. I know that a lot of people think that it's a bit boring, but if you look at the craft of it, it was shot timelessly in that it has the moves and
not
everything.
1920, but
No, that's from 1941. But what I mean is like so many movies, if they're exceptionally well done movies, it doesn't matter when they were shot because they're timeless. And I agree. Jaws is one of those that it doesn't look like it was shot 44 years ago.
Well, it uses a lexicon that I think was new for its time as well, just like Citizen Kane did.
Yeah.
Citizen Kane's lexicon literally confused people. They were like, okay, you know what? I'm out. I don't get this. I'm used to watching the rocket crash into the moon's eye. You know what I mean? That's my jam. I don't get this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
See, I love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I love the writing of it. I love how it's able to both be like really funny and charming, and then just get super, super dark and creepy. So that one was one of my favorites. What about you?
I'm torn because Rocky Horror Picture Show and Dog Day Afternoon are both hugely important movies in my life.
Oh yeah.
I think Rocky Horror Picture Show, I think that people have kind of turned against it a little bit in more recent years. I think because there are some things that like don't hold up as much in the modern era. But for me, it's like I don't view it in a modern lens. I view it as like being a kid in Ohio in like early like mid 80s, early 90s, and like having like so few exposures to things that were this explicitly queer, and just being like able to embrace that and enjoy it, and like having it like be something that's celebrated. Like people are going out to like go to movie theaters at midnight to see it and dressing up as it. Like there was very few examples of a time in my life where like, yeah, I'm gonna get some fishnets and it'll be totally okay. Like that was the thing about it. And I think that there's something really fun about it still for me. And then Dog Day Afternoon is so fascinating because like all the cliches of bank heist movies come from this movie. Like when you watch it now, if you've never seen it before, you're like, oh, I've seen all this happen already. But you're like, yeah, because this movie did it. Like this movie made it happen.
Right.
And the fact that it is a true story is fascinating. And the fact that like it's a true story made in 1975, the movie, about a man trying to rob a bank so that his trans woman partner can have a sex change operation, which we don't use that term now, but whatever. But like that's the plot of the movie. Like that's the hero of the movie is trying to get gender reassignment surgery for his partner, and like that's the premise of the movie. And like there's all this stuff about gay rights in it. Like there's all like there's like a whole like riot towards the end.
Police brutality.
Yeah. And this is like coming off of like just a few years after Stonewall. This is coming in that era. It's just amazing, and I couldn't believe how good it was the first time I saw it, because I had kind of written it off as just like one of those like dry 70s like cop movies or whatever, and it's actually really, really good.
Yeah, Sidney Lumet is incredible. He's an incredible filmmaker. throughout his career, but the 70s he made Network, which does not come out this year, but is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, it's really good.
And then A Dog Day Afternoon, The Run. I mean, he went on you really cannot go wrong with a Sidney Lumet movie. Just pick one.
Yeah.
Pick one, and it's. I will almost guarantee you it's going to be great.
And Sidney Lumet has a book on directing. Just if you're interested in film at all, read that book. He talks about things like showing up and making sure everybody has their type of bagel. Because it really helps the day to go along. I don't care how many shots you have mapped out. If Faye Dunaway don't have her bagel.
No, Network is Patty Chayefsky, right? Network's Patty Chayefsky.
He wrote it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, Patty Chayefsky. And Patty Chayefsky is in the Fosse Vernon thing.
Is he really?
He was Bob Fosse's best buddy. Anyway,
Sorry.
Gotta catch up. No.
And I don't. You know what? You guys have talked about these movies and they're all great. I like Barry Lyndon because it's lit by candles. Film dork.
No, Kubrick again. Yeah.
Kubrick again doing. I mean, look, he's a presence in a lot of these decades.
That kid's going places.
Oh yeah, that Kubrick kid.
So far, we've learned that both Kubrick and Spielberg and Orson Welles, they're all good directors.
Directors.
In case you all weren't aware of any of this.
And the young person, that young person we were talking about, Hitchcock.
Yeah,
I think he's
doing pretty good.
too.
Yeah, we're all like, hey, this guy's really well-directed movies. He's moved by famous directors.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail, also that year.
Yeah.
Nashville, director from Hal Ashby, one of the seminal directors of the 70s who has been, I'm sorry to say, sort of lost by many in time and does not get the credit along with.
Didn't he do Five Easy Pieces?
He did Five Easy Pieces. He did Being There. He did Harold and Maude.
Harold and Maude is one of my favorite movies.
Wow.
He did so many great movies, and he was right there at the forefront of revolutionizing cinema with Easy Rider in the late '60s and going into the '70s with the Scorseses and the Coppolas and the De Palmas, everybody else. And he passed earlier, far earlier than any of the others, and I think just because his films were not as ostentatious as far as style, perhaps he wasn't noted as like a stylistic enough director to build the kind of Altman-esque reputation, and so people remember his films, but I don't think they necessarily connect him to them, and that's a real shame because he was a hugely important figure in this.
Especially when you do what you're supposed to do, which is serve the story,
right.
Instead of being like, "Check me out, Boogie Nights, meow." You know, it's just like, all right. I love Paul Thomas Anderson, but boy, that camera does so many things. What are you doing?
It's also weird that he yells the name of all his own movies while he's directing it.
Yeah, and There Will Be Blood. He was like, "Boogie Nights, baby."
Well, and I think maybe an aspect of that too is that because you said like he passed on early, a lot of the directors of his era are still actively making movies, and so they still kind of maintain that cultural presence, whereas he doesn't have the ability to do that because he went ahead and died like a jerk. You know? But like I think that might be part of it. Like people still see Scorsese movies to this day. People still see, that might be a big reason why it hasn't carried through the way that.
And he was very much in the moment too. I mean, Shampoo, the film that came out this in '75 was very much tapped into the kind of sexual revolution in Hollywood at that time. Warren Beatty plays a hairdresser who was just sort of like this
Hot.
Lothario. Yeah.
Warren Beatty.
Based on Jay, what's his name? That was with Sharon Tate. And Once Upon a Time.
Oh yeah. I can't remember.
Jay Feinberg, something like that. Yeah, that guy.
But I think that's another reason is it's very tapped into the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what do we think overall? What is kind of the feeling or the takeaway for movies in 1975?
I mean, they got their Dr. Manhattan in Jaws. They thought there was a lot of superhero movies. They thought there were these are top grossers. And then John Osterman steps out, blew everything, and blew everybody away. And I think it's the first time, one of the first times that wider release was done. Mm-hmm. And it stayed in, I think, movie theaters for a long time with a giant wide release, which was like a different thing. So
Yeah, it wasn't one of those for, I don't know, anyone who's younger, it's going to feel like I'm trying to explain why we have dial tone. But there was a time when movies weren't released wide. It would be like this town gets the movie, and then that town gets the movie. movie, and everyone would kind of take turns. And so this was one of the first times where everyone got the movie at the same time.
Actually, all the actors would travel with the movie and just act out the movie. And
just like right in front
actually,
of the
it was
screen.
really what happened before movies were
Before
invented.
movies,
So
it was
I'm making
called,
fun of it like
theater.
it's
I feel like I just explained a CD player.
Do not
but-
make fun of the theater.
Well, I remember being a kid, and like it's still this way a little bit with like limited releases. But I remember being a kid, and like even in the '80s, and seeing movies were being released, and like a list of what theater, like what cities were giving them first.
Yep.
And be like, I want to be in a select city. Why can't I be in a select city?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. The Lion King actually was one of those. It
Yeah.
had a small select release first and then went wide.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Turns out you're really good with facts and trivia. Huh, weird. All right.
Well, I'm glad that I corrected you on something you already knew the answer to.
That's all right.
All right, so we're going to move on to 1984. That is a movie which I think some of our younger audience will be more familiar with some of these movies. We've got Ghostbusters, The Terminator, Beverly Hills Cop, which was the highest grossing, Amadeus, which won Best Picture, Purple Rain, Karate Kid, 16 Candles, Footloose, This is Spinal Tap, Gremlins, Nightmare on Elm Street. So basically just a huge part of your pop culture canon is starting in 1984.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always going to be Purple Rain. Purple Rain is so good and so weird, and the music was obviously amazing. And I still contend, and I don't know how true this is, I contend that Purple Rain is part of the reason we got Gem and the Holograms, because it kind of like it was a very similar feel, and you could even see in some of the holograms makeup.
Totally.
So yeah, that one obviously,
Let's
Terminator,
make this
they're all
safe for
great.
white kids. Yeah, that's basically what.
And then superhero-fy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, without all the weird domestic violence.
Oh well, speaking of safe for white kids, Breakin'.
Thank you, because I'm always the one bringing it up, and so I decided that I was gonna take a back seat on this one.
Yeah,
Well, you picked this as your favorite year, right?
Yeah,
This is your
yeah.
year that you picked.
Well, Breakin' came out as well as somehow Breakin' 2. Which
Electric
is
Boogaloo?
Yeah, which is weird because I guess they was just such a hit at the beginning of the year. They dropped it right at the end. They're like, yeah, these kids can't get enough Breakin'.
You know what the kids love? They love breaking, and then they love breaking again.
Oh yeah.
Well, that whole Canon Golden Globus machine.
Yes.
Yes.
Pump out. I'm not saying crap, but they could pump out movies at a very rapid pace.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
And
documentary.
there's also a huge
There is.
quality drop
Yeah.
from Breakin' to Breakin' 2.
How dare you, man?
Should I go?
I think they shot him at the same time, which makes the fall in quality hilarious. It's like, how did you guys fall off? Did they take the money away? Oh, wait a minute. They probably did.
Yeah.
It just gets
They just
brighter.
edited together scenes that were cut out of Breakin' and put in Breakin' 2.
Look, there were movies that those two made where they were literally filming them while people were trying to cut out the power cord. Do you remember the name of the documentary about them?
Oh my God. I watched it, and it was a long
it's
time
still
since
on
I watched
Netflix.
it. But it's about Canon Films and Golden Globus, and just about the successful crap that they made,
Yeah.
that eventually just were consumed by their worst instincts. I cannot remember the name of it, but
trying to look it up
you
now.
seek it out
Thank
because
you.
it is very funny. You can just probably search Canon
Yeah.
Films documentary.
Yeah.
It's-
Electric Boogaloo, the wild untold
it's called
story
Electric
of Canon
Boogaloo.
Films.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. It is.
All those words are in there.
all in
every
there.
word we said was in the
Every
title.
word we've ever said.
That's a great documentary.
Yeah,
Masters of the Universe, Superman 4, so much stuff that came from
Oh
it.
my God.
Oh yeah, Cyborg.
Cyborg,
They almost
yeah.
did a Spider-Man movie.
They did.
Yeah.
They came that close to doing a Spider-Man.
I did a
They did not
four-part.
do the Roger Corman did the Final Fantasy 4 one.
He
right?
did that,
'Cause He
yeah.
had a similar filmmaking style of like, let's just make all the movies at once.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and speaking of which, Canon as well as, well, not Canon maybe, but anyway, Supergirl.
Yeah.
The Supergirl movie that imprinted upon Danielle. She truly believed the girl could fly.
I did. I truly believed a girl could fly.
Yeah, that came out in 1984. I mean, I'm just the list has a lot of popular movies, but I'm just gonna run down some super ones you might have missed. Runaway, which is about runaway technology. It has Tom Selleck, Gene Simmons, and Kirstie Alley in it.
Oh my God.
That came out in 1984.
Wow.
Cloak and Dagger with Dabney Coleman and the kid from Witness, I think, or whatever.
That was like
came out.
Dabney Coleman's heyday too.
Oh yeah,
He was just
Dabney
cranking them out
Coleman
at that
Day.
point in time.
Repo Man.
Oh.
Nightmare on freaking Elm Street came out in 1984. 1984 came out in 1984. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind by Miyazaki came out in 1984. Rhinestone, Streets of Fire, Blood Simple for all you Coen Brothers
Coen
fans.
Brothers, yeah.
Wow.
A bunch of dentists gave some luminaries some money in 1984, and they launched an oeuvre. Toxic Avenger came out.
man.
Wow.
1984. This is seminal times,
I'm going to
guys.
throw one more at you. Top Secret.
Top
Yes.
Secret.
Wow.
Yes. Top Secret. I have that
Or,
on my list.
as I called it when I was younger, the popcorn movie.
The popcorn. No, that is True
sorry,
Genius.
That's True Genius.
Yeah.
That's True Genius.
right.
Yeah.
But also with Val Kilmer.
Also Val
Top
Kilmer.
And it's
Secret
also the
is-
Bubble movie. There's bubbles.
That's true.
That's true.
Bubble bath movie.
Yeah, no. Top Secret is the sort of play on many things. It's like Airplane. It's the
Yeah.
same. It's the Zaz. It's
Yeah.
Zucker Abraham Zucker.
It's their spy movie instead of their
yes,
disaster movie.
and I think it's hilarious.
I didn't like it as a kid because I never like gave it a chance because it looked too much like the movies that I didn't like to like the dry spy movies that I wouldn't like as a
yeah.
kid. So when it would come on TV, I would get bummed about it. Whereas I would watch Airplane and laugh nonstop. But
Yeah.
when Top Secret came on, I'm like, oh, I'll watch this.
Yeah.
Oh, also Spinal Tap.
Oh.
1984.
Oh wow.
Spinal Tap came out in 1984. I got my list here. Police Academy came out in 1984. Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. 84. Once Upon a Time in America. Buckaroo Banzai. Revenge of the Nerds. A lot of stuff came out in 1984.
That is a huge year.
Yeah.
Spinal Tap has a joke in it, and I think maybe I was reading it in a review that Roger Ebert wrote about it. But it has all of the these go to 11, and it's got all of the classic
Yeah.
lines. But there's so much stuff that's in it that's subtle. And what somebody pointed out to me, and I didn't notice it until maybe the last 2 or 3 times that I watched it, is even if you watch Rob Reiner in the opening scene, because he's the filmmaker, the documentarian who's
Yeah.
made the movie, and he's introducing the film, and it plays with the idea, and it's such a subtle joke of people that are behind the camera not being comfortable on camera because the whole time he's like crossing his arms and like awkwardly he's like
Yeah.
playing, but it's so subtle that I never noticed it, but when you notice it you're like, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Like to
Yeah.
layer that kind of a joke into the movie of this guy who's just very uncomfortable on camera.
That's the thing about a lot of those guest movies, like the ones that he then went on and directed himself in the later years, where there's a lot of jokes like that. And there's a lot of jokes in those movies that are like, it's hard to even describe the joke to someone without having to lay track as what happened to where they got there, and it's it's so fun to watch play out.
They're so great. So Ed, you chose this as your year.
Yeah, I have a couple more. Romancing the Freaking Stone.
Oh, wow.
Came out in this year. Conan the Destroyer. My girlfriend's favorite movie of all time. I think she's got a Grace Jones thing. Red Dawn.
Wow.
Came out in 1984. John Milius's paranoid, wonderful fantasy that a lot of people load their basements with equipment for to this day. Night of the Comet. Man.
Oh,
a little deep
Yeah.
cut zombie movie with all types of stuff. So I mean, this is just Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Spoiler alert: it wasn't.
It was not the final chapter.
It was definitely not.
Not at all.
Cannonball Run 2, The Killing Fields, that Dune, that weird Dune.
Yeah.
David Lynch.
Yeah, David Lynch Dune.
Did you ever see
Body
Never-Ending
Double,
Story?
All types of stuff. Never-Ending
I
Story.
just saw it on the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never-Ending
Yeah.
Story, Firestarter. I mean, this list is crazy nuts.
Yeah.
Dreamscape.
This is like a single
Ice
day
Pirates.
of Netflix over the course of
Yes.
1984.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so then what do you think this year is remembered for, and why is this your favorite?
This is my zeitgeist year because number one, Last Starfighter made me think I was the one. It was my first the one mythology that I really keyed on. Like, yeah, I'm good at Frogger or whatever. Maybe somebody would have to get an amphibian across the street in some space.
Did you go to every
I
arcade from then on trying
I
to
can cross the
win?
street.
Yeah, I can cross the street. I'm a genius at that. I'm alive. So that was a weird one. Then I watched Firestarter, which made me think about, what if I had powers though? If I had these powers, but then the government, maybe I don't have enough powers to defeat the government. And that was a weird thing. And then Red Dawn freaked me out. I was a little kid looking out my window for a little while.
Ruskies are coming.
Yeah, the Ruskies are coming. It was my first experience of that type of crap.
Oh, yeah.
And then Romancing the Stone was probably the first romantic movie that I enjoyed because there was alligators and Danny DeVito's in it. There was all types of stuff that was
Two
distracting.
things you cannot go wrong with in a movie
Oh.
are alligators and Danny DeVito.
I think I might
That
have
hot
been.
Kathleen Turner voice.
Yeah, I think I might have been activated.
Smoky voice.
I was a Manchurian candidate that was activated by Kathleen Turner's voice. Definitely.
I definitely saw some ads for V.I. Warchowski when I was very, very young, and I'm just like, that's an interesting, different timbre. And I feel like
And last but not least, Dreamscape with Dennis Quaid. He fought like a cobra monster. And one of my first screenplays, the hero fights a cobra monster, and I never understood where I got this dope cobra monster from. And I went back and looked at Dreamscape on Netflix. I was like, "You jacked this cobra monster full cloth out of this movie. You're just a collection of influences like everybody else." And last but not least, Beverly Hills Cop. 'Cause it
Yeah.
let me know that like Bugs Bunny always wins. One of my seminal movie fights victories was on the back of Bugs Bunny, because and Bugs Bunny. Eddie Murphy is Bugs Bunny in that movie.
Yeah.
He can't be hurt. He can't be killed. This world that he doesn't get, you don't get this world. He's going to flip it on your head. The new sheriff in town, although that was in another movie of his. But you know what I mean? I love that aspect of it. And to this day, when I'm driving down here to Beverly Hills in my bucket, I think I'm Axel Foley. Every single time I'm driving through the hills, seeing all these rich people, and I just stir it up. Got to bring it up now. That's what I think of when I'm driving through Beverly Hills, because I know I don't belong in a lot of ways, just like Axel did, but I do, because I'm not quite as cool as Axel Foley, but I'm trying. So that's my hero.
There we go. There's some of that banging I was talking about. All right, so we're going to move on to the next kind of communal year, and then we're going to break it down to some of our individual picks.
We did say Ghostbusters, right?
I mean,
yeah.
Okay, I'm making sure. I know we have it on the list, but then Ed had his entire opus here.
Yeah.
I was afraid we didn't circle back to Ghostbusters and Terminator as movies that we mentioned.
Well,
I don't want people being mad that we didn't mention them.
I feel like those are movies
People
we talk
be
about
mad.
all the time.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I just meant
make sure.
if we didn't mention them. We
Oh, no, I'm like going down the list.
Yeah, Karate Kid and Amadeus.
Cool.
Yeah, Karate
Okay.
Kid, Amadeus, and Gremlins. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, so for 1999, these movies are The Matrix, The Blair Witch Project, Fight Club, The Sixth Sense, Being John Malkovich, The Iron Giant, Election, Toy Story 2, Phantom Menace, which was highest grossing, and American Beauty, which won Best Picture. Oh, I'm so happy I get to talk about Election.
Yeah.
I'm so happy.
it's a great movie.
It's amazing. It's where I fell in love with Reese Witherspoon. It's just a movie that makes you watch Broderick just completely break down while this overachieving, girl who, maybe is unlikable, but, she's trying her best. And I don't know. I love Election.
Yeah. I have to go Matrix. It's easy.
Yeah.
It's easy, I know, but it was a game changer, and it was something. It was one of those rare movies where you didn't really know anything about it going into it, and it did so many interesting things with special effects at the time, and kind of like challenging how you view the world and stuff like that. So I mean, it's an easy choice, but how do I not?
Yeah. No, that's fair. It's an easy choice because it makes sense. 'Cause it's good. What about you, Ed?
Malkovich. I love that movie. I think it was. I think that guy and Michel Gondry, obviously Spike Jonze directed that, but that and Michel Gondry were probably my favorite filmmakers of the 90s, maybe, or 90s, early 2000s, because I just really felt that there was an oddness in this voice of this movie, and obviously Charlie Kaufman deserves a lot of credit for a brilliant screenplay. I think it's of its time in a really good way. I don't know that this movie happens before 1999.
No,
I don't think so at all.
It's one of those keystones to. I was 16 years old
Spike
in
Jonze said it,
1999, and I was obviously way into movies already, but having theatrical experiences that year, I mean, it was like, there's the really great films are the ones that you remember seeing the first time.
Yeah.
And there's only a handful, like I'll see maybe one or two of those a year, maybe. And in 1999, like there are so many that I remember. Matrix, Blair Witch Project, Fight Club, Sixth Sense, all of them movies that challenged the conventions that I thought I knew about storytelling, about plot and character, and setting things up and making you rewind a movie in your head and go back and see and like analyze how it was made. How did M. Night Shyamalan do that? How did David Fincher layer these clues into the movie and going back and picking apart shots and it was such an important a part of just being analytical about film for me. And it just came at that right moment that just like, if I was already waist deep in film, like 1999, I completely submerged myself in it. And you find that, I think, with people that get into, whether it's music or movies or whatever, a lot of times they'll be in a kind of formative age in a year where somebody or a group of people come in and really shake things up. And that was 1999.
I was lucky enough to be working at a movie theater when this happened. Yeah. So it was, I got to watch a lot of these movies a half an hour at a time, which is the best way to watch a movie.
Oh, that's the best way to watch Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
You come in one day, I hate sand or whatever.
Yeah, I'm going back to Psycho. I think that's a good year for movies that relied so much on word of mouth and not spoiling, and like
Yes.
learning, like Fight Club, The Sixth Sense, and even to a degree the Blair Witch Project. Like Blair Witch is 100% what it was because of its marketing. Like that was
Yep.
a movie that like the hype going into it is what made you enjoy that movie. Like there was that weird. Like I think nowadays you couldn't pull that hoax off of like people. This is real footage they found. Like, and I knew that it wasn't real then because I'd read like an article about it, but it felt like most people did believe that it was real, and that also maybe even people who didn't like just wanted to believe it was real, and it kind of we kind of like agreed to just accept this fake reality that we were actually seeing footage that had been found in a camera in the middle of the woods somewhere, and that these people really died. Even though the fact that the cast of the movie were in other movies coming out at that time period, we still somehow were like yeah, I don't know. I think it's like really like I think it really happened. And I knew people who just would insist that it was real for a long time.
And we just wanted to believe that those kids were really afraid of those arts and crafts. Like we really wanted to believe that those
Stick
kids
trees.
were really scared.
Sticks, yeah, exactly.
Are there any other kind of overarching things about this year, 1999? What do you think is one of the takeaways from filmmaking in this time?
Experimentation. I think the emergence of the indie scene into the mainstream.
Yes.
Which had already begun several years earlier, but I think it was the biggest influx of new talent since I think the 70s, when you saw the people like Scorsese and Spielberg and Lucas beginning to make a name for themselves. I think you had a similar thing here in 1999 when you had people like the Wachowskis and David Fincher and Spike Jonze and Charlie Kaufman on the writing side, and Alexander Payne breaking through Sam Mendes with films that hit not just the art house scene but connected in the cultural zeitgeist.
I think it's a banner year too for CGI as a filmmaking tool. Like I think because between The Matrix, especially, and Phantom Menace and stuff like when you're moving away from movies that only use more practical effects, and you actually have Phantom Menace, which does have practical effects but uses so much green screen, and The Matrix, which uses like invented bullet time and things like that to make it happen. So it's an era for using technology inventing technology for your movie to then tell your story in a way that you couldn't have previously.
Yeah.
I think
and I also think it's one of those eras where it's about reality changing. Look at The Matrix, look at Fight Club, look at Sixth Sense. It's like, okay, what is real? What's the definition of what is real? What is real is changing. What's really going on is I can get on the computer for the first time ever and get me download some all type of stuff. You know what I mean? and
Well done.
A reality is changing.
You don't have to go to the woods anymore.
Yeah, didn't have to go to the woods. Exactly.
The kids in the woods.
for your arts and crafts.
Those woods and loading times were terrible. but yeah, so the world is literally changing around you, and then you look at all the films, even Election. Election was about like, oh, look at the new reality we're in, where like maybe the kids are running the asylum, maybe the kids know more than the adults for the first time,
or even
maybe they're more savvy.
Like a comedy like Office Space was just so much about someone being like in his own head and just kind of going with the flow, and then one day waking up and realizing that hacking is real. Whatever.
And then he changes his reality. By going, oh, I don't have to care about this, and that literally changes the reality. So I think what's real and what's not, how do we perceive reality? Can you change your reality as an older person like the guy in American Beauty does and different stuff? Obviously there's problematic stuff, but blah, blah. These people change. And Iron Giant. Is Iron Giant real?
I could even say it about Phantom Menace, because Phantom Menace is Darth Sidious in the background working behind. Everyone always dumps in that movie with, oh, it's a movie about trade negotiations, but it really isn't. It's a movie about how Palpatine used these things to maneuver himself into power. Like, it's just not well executed. That's the problem with it. Like, it's like the actual idea behind it is fantastic. It just doesn't play out the way it should.
Lots of people standing around. All right,
they're literally demolishing the room outside.
You should see.
I know we mentioned it, but they are literally demolishing.
Like with hammers, and they are taking out walls,
changing our reality.
They're breaking barriers. Literally,
these filmmakers trying to break through that wall.
And it's going to be Sam Mendes. Oh my God! Look at there.
I am expecting a Kool-Aid Man situation anytime. Oh yeah.
With my luck, it'll be a Mountain Dew Man.
Mountain Dew Man.
He found you. He finally
finally
found
got me.
you. All right, so now we're going to get into some of our picks before we wrap it up.
Sure.
So Dan, take me through 1982.
I mean, any year you can pull out a bunch of great movies, but for me, if you look at 1982, the length and the depth and the amount of different kinds of movies that came out that ended up being absolute classics, and not all of them in their time, I think is shocking. Like, if you just look at, this is June 1982, and this is just some of June 1982. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, The Thing, Blade Runner, and Poltergeist. That's June. Like within 2 weeks of each other. Star Trek II and Poltergeist opened the same week. Blade Runner and The Thing opened the same week.
That's crazy.
The fact that you have 4 films like that are still regarded as classics inside and outside of their genres is pretty incredible. Add on top of that E.T., for a time the most successful film of all time. Add to that Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman, one of the most highly regarded comedies of the 80s, and again, a massive box office success. Add to that Tron, a cult classic that is influential. Talk about graphics and computer imagery and special effects, hugely influential. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, one of the most influential teen comedies of all time. First Blood, we're still getting Rambo movies. Redefined Sylvester Stallone's career. The Dark Crystal, which we have a new version of coming out now. Creepshow, they're making a new Creepshow right now in the horror genre. And then The King of Comedy, one of those movies that you talk about, it finds an audience over time. One of Scorsese's most, for a while, unknown films.
Yeah.
That is now
I randomly saw it on cable one day. I was like, what is this?
30 plus years later is now coming to be regarded as one of his better films. So just, every year has breakout hits. But if you look at 1982, the amount of films from different genres that popped and became classics coming out in the same proximity, sometimes the same week, is pretty staggering.
So what do you think is your big takeaway about 1982?
I think when you look at it, it was largely, I think, a lot of these filmmakers from the 70s coming into their own in the mainstream and hitting in a mainstream genre. Someone like a John Carpenter who started, indie with Halloween, even though The Thing was not a huge financial success initially, it was a play at the mainstream. E.T. was Spielberg, continuing to just hit that vein in the culture. Blade Runner with Ridley Scott, Poltergeist, Tobe Hooper, who had started with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Poltergeist becoming a big mainstream horror hit. Even looking at, Star Trek II hit in a much more mainstream level than Star Trek the Motion Picture had, because it tapped more into the broader themes of Star Trek and a character arc and a character piece. I think it was the year when a lot of these niche movies moved a little step closer to the mainstream, and I think it is a very important year for genre.
Yeah.
For genre being taken seriously in ways that it's still, the movies from this era are still echoing today.
Yep.
That's great. Riley?
I picked 1994, and I picked it very quickly as soon as we were asked to pick a movies. I think I have one movie.
You already had it in your brain knowing that it was your favorite?
It's like one of those ones that rolls around in my head. Is like, I can't believe how many movies came out in this one given year. There's one that I thought was, but maybe I looked at the wrong year. But I mean, first of all, we mentioned it earlier, you got Lion King. Lion King was it was a game changer for Disney, because it was an era where it was the beginning of their movement away from purely hand-drawn animation into CGI. Like, as much as we poo-poo the new Lion King for being so CGI'd, but then calling it live action when it's really animation. Like, that was back then. They had the caribou, like the wildebeest, like Stampede. That was all CGI. That was all new stuff. You got some huge breakers into the industry. Like, you've got Pulp Fiction, which after coming off Reservoir Dogs really solidified Tarantino as his space and time. You've got Speed, which really gave us a great combo. Got us the Keanu, got us Sandra Bullock. I mean, they were already working at the time, but that was a great it moved Keanu Reeves into this action hero kind of vibe.
And it gave us
Keanu Reeves completely.
And then gave us Sandy Bullock.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got Jim Carrey in general had a banner year in 1994. We had Ace Ventura, we had The Mask, and we had Dumb and Dumber, which means in between Ace Ventura being a big hit is when then he was like because like they cast him in other stuff because that movie was so strong. I had some issues with the ending, but otherwise, yeah, solid movie. And at the time, it was the funniest thing in the world as a kid. Like that was just I couldn't believe how funny it was. And it was like one of those things where like I love Jim Carrey. My parents hated him. Like that kind of thing. Like he's obnoxious in his face. So that was a huge one. You've got one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Shawshank Redemption, came out that year. You've got another one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Ed Wood, which I still think is Tim Burton's best movie. You got The Professional. You got Interview with the Vampire. You got Stargate, which you got Reality Bites. You got the Winona Ryder Little Women. If you watched Comedy Central in the 90s, you saw Airheads a lot, and Airheads was 94.
Every day. Every day.
Every day, 2 o'clock.
Yeah. Time Cop. Time Cop was 94.
Oh,
yeah. I mentioned queer films earlier. Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, came out in 94. Wow. We talk about, I think this is off mic, but Kevin Smith broke in 94 with Clerks. Clerks was 94. Speaking of Star Trek, I agree with you that, like, not unlike Wrath of Khan, I think that First Contact is, like, the better of the Next Generation movies, obviously, but Generations came out in 94, so that was, like, kicking off a new era of Star Trek movies, and the first time you're like, what if we did Star Trek movies that weren't just about the original cast?
Yeah, the bridge, no pun intended, but the bridge between the old cast and the new cast.
We have D2, the Mighty Ducks sequel, which was, I think, in my opinion, a better movie than the first one, and then we also have, I think, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Street Fighter, also.
Yes, thank you. So. I appreciate you. Good looking out.
Yeah. And there's a million more. Like I had to stop writing names down because there were so many movies that came out in 94. Like people will love this one. People will love this one. So they just that was just it's just bam, bam, bam. So many movies that I just like can pull off the top of my head.
And so other than this being your favorite, why is it your favorite? And also, what do you think? What's the larger kind of context for what this year's about?
I was thinking about that a lot, and I think that weirdly it is kind of a generation switch of a year. I think like you've got Tarantino coming in as this filmmaker who grew up in Hollywood and like in love with the old era and kind of made this movie that is kind of a mashup of all these old films and his own voice to it as well. You've got like Lion King is literally about Simba being the new generation of king. You literally have Star Trek Generations coming out in this movie. Interview with the Vampire deals a lot with like Kirsten Dunst's character being an old woman in a child's body by the end of the films of that like generational challenges there. I think I'm mentioning Jim Carrey. I think that, like I said, my parents hated Jim Carrey. So it was like an era where a new generation of like a sense of humor was taking over from what had previously been like the comedy movie like style. And you're also getting, the Farrelly Brothers kind of humor is hitting the main stage for the first time. And it kind of did break into that era of gross out comedies, which I wasn't as big a fan of, like some of the more gross out stuff, but that was like the first steps into that. And then it was one of those things where like, this works, let's just go further and further with it, and then ruined it. But so I think that's like a big thing about it. I think there's like an idea of like being young, looking at the world, and then connecting with this larger world out there. And that's what Stargate is about. Like Stargate's like, we're like a less advanced race, and there's these symbols of another race that's somewhere off in space when we can go find them. And so that's a huge, I think that's a big, and even Clerks is kind of like in that, like you're in that, it's first of all, it's another like young filmmaker who wants to put his step into the medium, but also. And
it could have went real wrong. Don't put things on credit cards.
Yeah. No. And also just being like, even the plot of the movie is like this like stunted space in between childhood and adulthood and not really knowing where you're going with it.
Well, and I think that generational thing is dead on with that year, because even if you look at things like the Academy Awards, like that was the year where you always had this overlap where you're sharing space, and that was the year of like Pulp Fiction versus Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Right.
Which ended up, the Oscar went to the more, while Forrest Gump was a technically groundbreaking movie on a technological level as far as visual effects, it was the epitome of a
boomer movie.
Studio. We are marketing to the 50s and 60s crowd, journey through history thing versus Pulp Fiction, which just blew the doors off of stuff and was just literally stabbing people in the heart with adrenaline.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to see that. I think we just saw it with the Oscars this year.
Yeah.
With the, you have movies like Green Book, which are very traditional, very rooted in what's worked in the past, very rooted in sentiment, very rooted in an idealistic and an idealized version of what things are, versus a lot of movies that were in to shake up the status quo, to be very visceral, real depictions of what life is like. Filmmakers that are really bursting onto the scene. And every 20 or 30 years, I think you see years like that where it's like you have these two conflicting. Not that they hate each other, but it's just the tradition versus breaking it, and they just come straight into conflict. And 1994 was definitely one of those.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say breaking it?
We talked about how the 60s were the era of like the challenging like studio films, and the 90s I think was really that era of the challenging indie films. That's when like indies broke through, and then we started to get into the situation where like studios started having their own little indie labels, like Miramax and stuff like that, which problematic, yes, but still brought us Pulp Fiction. So
yeah.
All right, so for me, I went with 2007, a year that brought us Juno, The Departed, which won Best Picture, Zodiac, No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood, American Gangster, Superbad, Ratatouille, Knocked Up, Grindhouse, Death Proof / Planet Terror, I'm Not There, 300. I didn't say highest grossing because of Spider-Man 3, and that belongs nowhere on this list. So for me, obviously, this has some heavy hitters like Departed, No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood. It's also got some great comedy with Superbad and Juno, which I thought was really funny. Knocked Up, obviously, was huge, a big, huge movie. Kind of a Seth Rogen-y, well, he can't be a naissance if someone hadn't happened yet, huge, but
it was a big
year for Seth Rogen.
Big kickoff.
I would say similar to the Jim Carrey Fairly Brothers era of the 90s. I think this was the era where the Judd Apatow style movie came. It's like the Seth Rogen Renaissance, but Judd Apatow, who had come off of Freaks and Geeks to come off of Undeclared, both being kind of like mild successes or even failures because they were canceled in one season, but suddenly became the defining voice of comedy for the era of movies.
Absolutely. And so for me, when I think of 2007, I think this is another big director year. Like when you look at, Juno, which that was obviously a breakout, and that was a breakout for her. It's very much like an auteur almost. Like there are some studio stuff, but a lot of this is, this is someone's vision. This is something that's very direct. So it feels like more of a director year to me. And then there's some people doing some stuff that, like Grindhouse, which was a risk. It doesn't feel like it was as much a risk, but it was for those.
And it didn't pay off.
It did not pay off.
Yeah, at the time, it was not a financially successful venture.
Yeah, and it may have been better had they been split into two separate movies, rather than having it where you would go when you're basically spending 5-6 hours in a movie theater.
Yeah.
And so, for me, and I'm Not There, which I thought was another one which is great. Another huge risk for me to have someone telling the story of Bob Dylan throughout different stages in his career,
love that movie,
using different. I love that movie.
So good.
Using different actors and actresses. That might be my favorite of the year.
Yeah.
I think
There Will Be Blood is mine. There Will Be Blood is, I think, one of the best movies made in this century.
Agreed.
I think Paul Thomas Anderson. I'm honestly a little hit or miss on his movies. Sometimes I'll see what he's going for, but it's just not quite my speed. There Will Be Blood is so my speed, and I've seen it many times. It still never has felt its length. I just think the levels of brilliance on an acting level, on a technical level, I think it's an incredible film. I think it's an amazing film. I hope it's a movie that in 20 more years people will look back on this era and say that was one of the keystone films. We can't say that now. I know it seems like, well, it came out 12 years ago. That's nothing.
Yeah.
As far as cinematic legacy, that is nothing. 12 years is absolutely no time at all. But I do think that There Will Be Blood will be one of those movies.
I think it coming out the same year as No Country for Old Men really hurt it too, because it's a movie that is similar enough to it. Yeah. And even though No Country for Old Men also is inaccessible at points, it's a little bit more accessible than There Will Be Blood. And I think that's why it edged it out in the Oscars and why it got up there. Although I remember I saw No Country for Old Men in the theater, and I remember there was a woman in the theater next to me who could not handle any of it, any of the violence. Anytime Anton Chigurh pulled a gun out and fired it, she was like, oh my gosh, oh my, and so that was risky and then so was There Will Be Blood, but it felt like that movie just because it still had that feeling of an old school like cowboy movie. I think that like people could go, okay, I still kind of get what this is and what's happening here.
Well, and No Country for Old Men also came at a time with the Oscars, and you see this happen a lot where the Coen brothers made a great movie. They had gotten some Oscar recognition for Fargo, the screenplay, but they had not yet gotten the big prize, the top prize, Best Picture and director and all that stuff. And so I feel like in a tie ball game, and there was some other strong work that came out that year, a lot of the tiebreaker was given to, well, the Coens are great, it's their time, and that swept No Country for. Also a really good movie, by the way. Not to cast aspersions.
It's the same as Scorsese with The Departed, where like that year was like that was his year to win that.
That was his year to
Yeah.
win, and I think that this was the year for the Coens to take those big awards. But I still love them.
Well, this also seems to be a good era for voice.
Yeah.
You know, because like Diablo Cody is like a superstar screenwriter because
of Juno and because of her voice. Yeah.
It had such a patois. And like Zodiac, right? Zodiac is a procedural where nothing happens ever. But it's like, look how dope this is, though. This is my version of a procedural.
Right.
We're not kicking down doors and get on the ground, and we're not doing a bunch of that. We're doing a lot of the minutia of investigation. Somebody deciding that was interesting enough to explore.
Right.
That's some 2007 for your ass.
That
you know
is.
what I mean?
Even American Gangster is that.
Yeah.
We're so used to gangster films depicting like this one type of gangster, but we're gonna like this was a real person who was doing these things, and we're gonna tell his story, and he was part of this world, and he was fighting for his voice in that world.
Yep.
So
I got to throw a shout out to Hot Fuzz.
Oh,
I'm a
yes.
fan,
Yeah.
So I got to throw a shout out to Hot Fuzz, and also to Mike Nichols' movie called Charlie Wilson's War, which
Yes.
was written
Yes.
by Aaron Sorkin and has one of my probably 3 favorite Philip Seymour Hoffman performances. He plays
That's a
the
great cast.
CIA agent
Yeah.
named Gust, and he is so good in that movie, and it was regarded as a disappointment when it came out. It didn't get great reviews. I don't know if it was too.
Well, this is right when
I
they
don't
started
know.
taking movies for grown-ups behind the shed and just whack.
Yeah.
Because like with that cast is like Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, like
Philip Seymour Hoffman, John Slattery's in it. I really Ned Beatty. I like that movie a lot, and like I said, the screenplay by Aaron Sorkin. But it's worth watching just for Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Absolutely.
He is so good in that movie.
I love him.
All right, so those were some of our big movies, or our big years for movies. We do want to know what yours are. Please leave those down in the comments down below. Thank you so much for joining us today on this really fun, pre-taped and being demolished episode of SJU, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.